Hello, hello, everybody. I'm here with another episode of the Mindful Constitution podcast. And today I am here with Cam Kirdzik, who is an awesome human being, first and foremost, but he is secondarily the founder of what is called Awakenpedia. It's really awesome, and I'll let him dive in a little bit more to explain, but it is basically an online platform for healing practitioners and seekers of healing modalities to come together. So think of like an encyclopedia of holistic healing practitioners. And the intention is really to support us all in just awakening and bringing a higher vibration to the planet and healing collectively in community with one another. He is not only is it kind of this community platform, but he is facilitating retreats, virtual and in person eventually as well. So just lots of really cool ways in which the platform functions to serve practitioners and, like I said, seekers. And so we're going to dig in because Cam is also sober. So we're going to talk about the impact that had on the construction of Awakenpedia and the trajectory of his healing and life. And so, hello, Cam. Welcome.
Hi, Katie. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being here and having this platform to share my story and just the birthing and scaling of Awakenpedia. So
Yeah,
thank you for having me.
of course. Yeah, thanks for coming on. So, okay, like I said, I wanted to let you explain Awakenpedia too from the horse's mouth. So, how do you explain Awakenpedia, and the inspiration behind it to anybody who hasn't
Mm,
heard that before?
yeah, sure. And it's always actually a challenging question to answer because it's one that Awakenpedia is evolving and iterating itself so quickly that I feel like, the what of what it is changing every time I'm asked this question. But the underlying intention and essence of the heart of Awakenpedia remains constant, which is that the really primary intention of this venture and community is to transmute suffering into peace, and to do so by looking at the root cause of our dysfunction and providing energy-based solutions, products, services in order to help kind of facilitate that healing journey, which so often, if not inevitably, occurs with this awakening journey that we're all on, whether we know it or not. And so Awakenpedia is simply this type of kind of centralized platform that provides teaching, services, events, retreats, authentic community, really a home to help you get home. And so it's this refuge of sorts that is, a genuine offering for those who perhaps don't know where else to turn. They have that inner knowingness called an inkling that pills and potions that the West tends to prescribe is not the answer. It's
Mm-hmm.
not the way out of the suffering that they're experiencing, which is what I experienced myself with the drinking that I know we'll get into.
Mm.
So this kind of was like a natural birthing of my own journey that I realized I was being called into to help usher into this next era of humanity, to help us genuinely correct our insanities and to provide genuine pathways for people to do so as well. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of the high level of it all, but of course, people can check it out more on awakenpedia.com. Kind of is like the hub for everything for them to kind of like see what's available for both seekers and for healers who are facilitating. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was a great job. Your evolving definition is very chef's kiss. So one thing that really stood out to me that you had said was this kind of intermingling of healing with awakening. Uh, And I think that's really a cool parallel to draw. And can you explain a little more about how you think one is kind of dependent on the other, or they happen like simultaneously?
Mm.
What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah. Um, well, if you look at the essence of awakening and like what that means, like what does it mean to be awakening? What are we awakening from and or out of? And many would describe the sleeping state as one of separation, perceived separation. And ultimately, it's an illusion of separation, the thought or belief that we are fundamentally finite, physically separate beings from one another and everything around us. That creates, this sense of I, this individual I, like
Hmm.
an island of me. So that's kind of often in spiritual terms described as the sleeping state. And that is the foundation of ego. And when we're awakening out of that dream, out of that illusion, and we're awakening into the knowingness that we are one, that we are connected. What is one is whole, and what is whole is healed. So it's this connection of awareness that as we awaken, we're awakening to the realization that we are already healed. So that's part of how I see this journey of where we're coming into the knowingness that we are perfect as we are, and that we actually are, we're already whole, already healed, and actually more in alignment with the Course in Miracle terms, but we are beyond harm in that sense. Our true self is actually eternal, infinite. And this is getting into the spiritual stuff, but the point is to say that so often, when we are stuck in ego, stuck in the dream, um, we're not aware of that essential nature. And
Mm.
so we're carrying a lot of that trapped energy that manifests as the illness and the dysfunction. But as we awaken out of that, we're shedding that trapped energy, shedding the ego, shedding, the toxicities, if you will, that allows us to step into remembrance of our whole state.
Mm.
So that's kind of a way to kind of bridge the two of like, as we're awakening, we're coming into awareness of our healed or whole nature.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a good description, and it is I feel like something I've never directly thought of, I guess, that our healing is rooted in awakening. And I think of it like the way you described is so beautiful, and I, in addition to that, think of just our conditioning and programming and stories and narratives we tell ourselves kind of just in a sort of almost mindless or autopilot way. And
Yeah.
for me, like a big part of awakening was realizing that like I can actually kind of examine those and measure them against my own
Mm.
inner knowing and integrity, to be like, wow, a lot of these like stories that I've been living in alignment to, or belief systems that I was never really exploring or examining, like actually aren't even serving me, and they're keeping me really stuck. And so shining light on those and awareness to those allowed me to realize like what behaviors were kind of keeping me stuck or in pain, or um holding me back or limiting me in a lot of ways, like limiting beliefs. And
Yeah,
so I think, yeah, there's so
exactly.
many different ways that you can even pair those together, but it is almost like they can't happen independently of one another, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, exactly. You said it better than I did, or perhaps in a way that I feel like is very more relatable to people on this journey, which is like, we have so many habits and so many autopilot behaviors, and this like the subconscious is in such control of how we live our lives. And that's, the robot effect, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when we're awakening out of those programs, out of that conditioning into the unconditioned state, which is the whole state, the healed state in that sense. And so as we awaken, we're freeing ourselves from ourselves and
Yeah.
we're escaping that type of programming that often ultimately results in the illness and dysfunction and all of the suffering we experience. So yeah, it's so funny. Like as we awaken to our true nature, we're healing because we're becoming lighter, we're becoming free of the mind cage of ego. And that ultimately translates on the physical plane into better health, into better vibrancy and vitality. So
because
yeah,
you're not like denying your true self anymore. You're actually like in control of like your thoughts and beliefs and awareness around the ones that you hold, like impact you directly physically. And, if they're not in alignment, that's like the state of disease when our
right.
programming, the way that we've been conditioned to live, like if it's just checking off societal boxes or even in terms of like alcohol, the belief systems that we've been kind of programmed with around that, when it's actually not serving us, but we're thinking like, but alcohol is supposed to be fun, but alcohol is supposed to help me decompress. And then we're actually not happy. It's like, oh, that's just one example of being able to like explore and awaken to the truths of it, as opposed to like our belief systems we've kind of had dumped into us through society. And it's so cool what you said too about the healing and the recognition that, we're all connected and to the world, to each other, to our experience here, because there's a saying too, the opposite of addiction is connection, and just think that can mean so many different things too, in terms of like the importance of community and healing, but also being part of something bigger than yourself, also realizing like what impact do I want to have on the collective instead of just focusing on yourself and how people perceive you and running on autopilot. So yeah, so
Yeah.
cool. And so like digging into the addiction, sobriety, I really wanted you to talk, because something I was thinking about that was really funny last time we talked is just, when you meet people after they're already sober, and sometimes I laugh because I'm like, if people think I'm some like goody two shoes, like I'm sober, and like if only you knew me before all of the healing journey began. And so, I was laughing because you had shared last time about, like, yeah, I was in a frat. I was like dancing on the tables, binge drinking, like crazy party guy. And so I would just love for you to share for the people listening, like what your drinking looked like before deciding to get sober, and like how were you different in your drinking days?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I like that question because yeah, so often we just see you know, the present day picture of like how many years into someone's sobriety journey and just kind of miss
Yeah.
the beginning parts of it that led to the why of like all of this happening. Um but yeah, I mean, I think it's so hard to kind of describe where like I picked up any type of drinking habit or any substance habit. So much of it's so, as you know, so deeply culturally embedded into society that it's almost a rite of passage. It's like, the first high school party I go to, there's like handles of vodka and like whatever.
Captain Morgan's. That was
Yeah,
a
exactly. Like
Smirnoff twist.
right, like the 9.99, plastic bottles, like, and it's just like it feels so normal because it's what everyone's doing, and so you feel like it's the right thing to do. Almost, it's
Mm.
strange, but I think that actually reveals how deep the sickness is into our culture and society, and why, like, I mean, this is a genuine, massive problem that we're facing. But not to get into that, so that's kind of just where I sense, where it began of my drinking. And drinking is an addictive chemical. And so it changes the brain neurology. And so what started as just kind of like, you know, uh, random high school party drinking ultimately,
Harmless.
yeah, we were talking about like what we carry this perhaps perception of like drinking being a harmless, innocuous activity, but it clearly is anything but that. Um, and so anyway, I just kind of like continued the drinking habits. Everyone was drinking everywhere. It was in my family. It was just normal. And so it became more continuous and consistent as a activity was involved in. Um, and uh, it became like integrated with every aspect of my life. So it seemed I drank to celebrate. I drank to mourn. I drank when I was bored. I drank when I was out with my buddies. I drank on dates. I drank with this. I drank with that. And drinking was everywhere, right? And so it just became kind of like my right hand man, so it seemed. And yeah, I joined a frat in college, and that was like, took drinking to a whole new level. Um, and what I'd say though is, so it seemed that drinking was more or less under control, and I say that in quotes because of course it was not, but it was under control until I experienced what I felt was kind of significant adversity. It was when I kind of started to get really challenged in life that the drinking kind of intensified. And, I feel like I actually was using substance, just as a preface again, originally because, and I tie this back to awakening now, because I was in a really disconnected state. Like I was not in an empowered state. I was sourcing my power from external means. And so I was therefore deeply insecure, deeply anxious, just like I was not comfortable in my own skin. So I used alcohol as that lubricant in order to help me function in life. And so that's where, and I can get into this, I'm sure we will later, but awakening was a really powerful way to help ultimately let go of drinking. But that disconnectedness at first, when I was in my sleeping illusion state, also was a big reason why, because I felt so uncomfortable and I didn't know why. And I used this alcohol to numb that pain. And then when more and more adversity happened, the deeper the pain became, the deeper the suffering felt. And so the more I drank in order to numb that suffering. But the paradox of it all was that my attempt to escape the suffering only exacerbated the suffering even more, so that it was this downward spiral where I just kept drinking, suffered, had life hardships, which made me drink more because that was my go-to coping mechanism. And and then COVID hit too, which really accelerated the drinking because you're home all day. And so drinking just more and more took over my life, day by day, inch by inch.
Yeah, it is interesting what you're saying too. It's almost like the social conditioning around alcohol perfectly lubricates us to develop alcoholism the moment that any kind of intensified trauma or hardship strikes, because we're like taught to drink for everything. And then when you do have something really challenging happen and you're already like a gray area drinker, it's just like, well, duh, why wouldn't I just lean into this like more? I'm told that that's what people do, and I'm basically brinking on alcoholism already because of societal conditioning to begin with, teaching us that a problematic relationship with alcohol is like normal. And so, yeah, it's really interesting to kind of see that. And I've never really thought of it that way, that we're really just primed, the minute we have trauma, then to like lean into alcohol and develop a problem with it, instead of being taught like early on, this is something that can be mindfully integrated, but you want to be really careful. It's almost like the opposite, where it's just kind of pushed on us at every turn. So it only seems natural that like if tragedy strikes or we have hardships in our life, that it would then be the coping mechanism of choice, and
Yeah.
it's addictive. And one question I had, what do you think came first? The awakening or the alcohol elimination? Or
Mm,
both at the same time? Like what?
mm,
Because sometimes for me, I reflect back and I'm like, I do feel like removing alcohol, I felt this like flourishing happen, and just deeper questioning of all my belief systems once the veil of alcohol was gone. But when I
yeah.
really think about it, there was definitely like a soulful nudging well before I stopped drinking.
Right. Right.
That like little bit of a voice inside that's like, this isn't the way, right? So
Right.
sometimes I wonder, like, what started first? And I think for me, it was like the inner awakening was like happening, and I was just doling it out with alcohol.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I I love that question. It's a great question, and I think the answer does have to be it's both. But because ultimately, it's like, well, what led to the giving up of the alcohol, right? If there wasn't the nudging, why would you give that up? And that's the question. I say that rhetorically to myself because I'd been drinking for almost a couple of decades or 15 years or whatever it was, and there's no way I would when at the time in which I was giving it up, I was drinking every day, you know,
mm,
uh, for most of the day, and it was just so integrated into my life that to give that up would require some type of colossal, fundamental inner shift, as opposed
mm,
to like willpower alone. So there definitely was an inner stirring of my awakening consciousness that was growing within me that made the dissonance I experienced from drinking so much greater. It made the pain so much louder. I was just like, why? Why am I doing this? I know it's not right. I know it's not true. I know it's not who I want to be. Why are you doing this to yourself? And so that kept growing. And I know that was being spurred by the truth in me that was saying, yes, this is not the way. This is not true. Now, at the same time, that that growing awareness within me perhaps led to the decision, to let this go. And then from there, I feel like they were starting. Once you let it go, or make that intention, express the willingness, and attempt, you can now they're working in alignment in tandem with each other. And I
yeah.
see alcohol as, you know, um, we are mind, body, and spirit, right? We're multidimensional beings. And when you're stuck in a drinking vortex, and the poison is swimming within you, it's affecting your neurochemistry, your physiology, it's affecting everything in you. That I felt was creating a static of sorts within my mind, clouding it quite literally, that prevented me from accessing the transcendent spiritual dimension. So when I let go of alcohol, it allowed me that static to disappear, which in turn actually accelerated and facilitated the awakening because it gave me clarity and allowed me to connect to that, as a channel to that
Yeah.
dimension. So, yeah.
Yeah, to have access to co-creation with the universe and God, spirits, whatever it is for you. But I think that's definitely one thing for me. It was like I was masking that voice because I knew I wasn't living up to my full potential. But then once I had the courage to remove the alcohol, you can just hear it so much more clearly and be so much more aligned, and everything is just much more accessible and in flow.
Mm,
And yeah, it is. It's something I've thought about a lot too, but that all it's a creation of an upward spiral, the opposite of the drinking vortex. And just
right.
it's so positively reinforcing when you start seeing the synchronicities and the shifts and how life actually can unfold in a state of flow so much more. Whereas when I was drinking, I just felt like everything was in resistance. It's the only way I can describe it. Like making everything so much harder for yourself.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Exactly.
what did your approach to sobriety look like? What was the first day and that you decided, like, what support did you seek? How did you go about it? And what has allowed you to kind of achieve sustainable sobriety?
Yeah. So I actually I quit cold turkey. I just I remember I was in Hoboken in New Jersey, and my perhaps the drinking capital of the United States. And it was 3 a.m. and I ripped a sambuca shot in the bar at 3 a.m. and it was after a full night of going out. And I remember I just woke up the next morning, um, and I was like, I felt horrible. it was like a horrible hangover once again. And I was like, this is it. I'm sick of this. I'm sick of this feeling, you know? And I think I had been building up to that moment for quite some time. Every morning, waking up with hangover after hangover, saying, why am I doing this to myself? Why am I doing this to myself? That voice growing louder, the pain growing more intense. And that awakening consciousness within me, helping me, nudging me to gain the courage to let this go, right? And then when I did, I knew I was in for a ride, and but I was trusting. I just had something in me that knew that I had to do this. This wasn't some fad or some, like, 1 month dry thing for me. For me, I knew it was deeper. And I remember that my sister's birthday, which was 3 days later, was at a penthouse, like, open bar thing in New York City. And I didn't drink at it. And any other situation, I knew that would be enough of a trigger that early into it to just go back. So getting through that sober was a massive indication of my sincerity and the inner shift happening that was driving this genuine fundamental change. So that kicked it off. And from there, I didn't go to AA. I didn't have actually really much. I didn't use any really third-party sources or support resources. I journaled, I meditated, and I had an app that was I'm Sober. You may be familiar with it. Pretty sure that's what it's titled. But that was helpful, just like sharing a lot of stories, hearing other people going through it. So that community was nice.
Mm-hmm.
But out of that, this was an inner journey for me of just self-exploration and journaling, literally for hours a day, meditating the rest of it, and just understanding the inner workings of my subconscious mind that was creating the habitual impulse to drink. And by shining that light of awareness on what otherwise is a completely darkened autopilot state of doing, that in turn over time helped to kind of dissolve the habits, which brought me back, gave me control back. So that was it. That was my pathway for it.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that you touched upon is just like having that strong desire and realizing this isn't working for me anymore and just not negotiating with yourself. Like, I'm done and today's the day. I remember the first day I stopped drinking was July 1st of 2020. So it was like mid-pandemic. And yeah, I had that voice like, but you can just start, tomorrow or like next week. I'm like, nope, like it's gonna suck no matter when you do this. And I was at the same level. I was definitely drinking every day. And it was during the that was peak pandemic. And I'm just like, if not now, when? Like, when am I going to like actually do what I know I need to do? And when am I actually going like it's never gonna be easy. And so why don't I just rip this Band-Aid off and start doing it? And what you said is so true too, like being prepared to really do that inner work, I think is huge because removing the alcohol, substances, I mean, that's just the beginning. Like it
Yeah.
sucks and it's hard, but it's like what's really hard is looking at yourself in the mirror and asking yourself why you were doing it in the first place. Like what pain are you ignoring, and suppressing with that kind of drinking? Because there obviously is some when we're drinking like that or using substances like in a harmful way, which as we talked about before getting on the call, like is almost always a harmful way. But so it's just the beginning, removing the substance, but being
Yeah.
able to do the inner work is the hard part.
Yeah, the hard part, but ultimately the necessary part, as I see it. And inner work is an energy-based endeavor, right? So, like, when you're going inside, you're working with the what's beyond the senses. You're going into the realm of the invisible. So you're starting to dive inwards to access that transcendent dimension. But if you don't go inwards to ultimately address the foundation of the problem, the root, then what tends to happen, I've noticed, is like you substitute. You give up alcohol, but maybe you pick up a Xanax addiction, or you pick up some
Mm,
other thing, or you switch substances so
mm,
that you're still getting the high of sorts. You're still escaping externally,
yeah.
and so you're actually not healing. It's just you're tricking yourself into thinking you're healing because you've switched one addiction for another, but the root of the problem's still intact. So your dysfunction is still manifesting, just in a different form.
Yeah. I see that honestly sometimes with weed because I feel like on the surface it looks less harmful than alcohol, which I think in a lot of ways it can be, but also I just think anything that you're using to like mask feeling your emotions, like even if it's not causing as much destruction in your life as say like binge drinking, it's the same thing, like if we're using any type of substance, even if it's less harmful superficially, then yeah, that's like the question to ask yourself is like, why am I using this? Or am I using it every time I feel uncomfortable? And really getting curious about your intentions behind it because it is so easy. And I think that's really important to talk about. Like, I think it's called transfer addiction or where you just kind of move from one thing to the next. And substances are one thing, but there's so many ways in which we distract ourselves from truly getting honest with ourselves, truly taking accountability for the life we really want. And it's just, they're everywhere. And I think our culture, even what you mentioned about medications and addressing symptoms instead of root cause, like our culture is really kind of built around immediate gratification. And I mean, I think there's time and a place for pharmaceuticals, but even with like the weight loss craze and Ozempic is like shoved down everyone's throat now. And it's like, I think that maybe there is cases where that is helpful and it can provide someone, a gateway into healthier living, but it's also so often that these like sources of immediate gratification or like quick fixes are pushed on us in a way that's so normalized. It's like abnormal to dig in and do the work and really get to the bottom of like living the life you want to live. Not only is immediate gratification shoved down our throats everywhere and like a constant escape from doing the work, but conversely, we have like stressful lives normalized and living totally out of alignment with your soul's purpose totally normalized and kind of being generally unhappy normalized. And so I feel like it's like, oh, well, that like people are all kind of like not that happy or not that fulfilled. And oh, well, everyone else like does these quick fixes. It's like really stepping up to the plate to be like, no, like I want to live a life where I'm happy and fulfilled and I feel vibrant and alive. It's like the same standards we have for health as you go to the primary care and they're like, well, you're like not dead and your labs look fine. It's like, yeah, but are we as healthy as we can be? Are we living the lives we were truly meant for? Are we waking up every day excited? Like, what are the standards that we're measuring ourselves against? And that's what I think is like the big shift that I like to emphasize with people is like that's doesn't matter what everyone else is doing. Like, look at our society. Do you
Yeah,
have that be your basis for comparison?
right, right. Yeah, it's a great point you bring up, Katie, just because um, the emphasis on the courage required in order to what feels like going against the stream, the current, because
Yeah.
mainstream and culture, society, family, everything is so often deeply embedded with escapism and using substance as normalization for dealing with pain, emotion, anything, trauma, just life living. It's like, you really have to have courage to go against that all because, um, and anyone who attempts sobriety will know what we're speaking of here because in a given year, you have dozens of triggering milestones and things that will try to pull you back into that unconsciousness, to pull you back into that web of toxicity. And unless your why is so deep, so fundamental, it's more common than not that people, kind of the relapse, right? They get pulled back into it and go back to sleep, essentially. So I find that that courage has to be so genuine. And that's where actually I feel like this is like the grace of suffering, actually, which is when the suffering is of such intensity, and this often correlates with what they call the dark night of the soul. But
Mm.
when that becomes so intense, where the pain of drinking then
Yes.
outweighs the fear of letting it go,
Mhm.
that's when you're able to actually lean into this journey with authenticity, with courage, because you're surrendering into it. You're like, what choice do I have? Because the pain of me drinking every day has gotten to such intolerability within myself that I have no choice. It's either, and this is how it was for me, die literally, or let this go and trust to see what happens.
Right.
Because I felt like there was no other options. So that's where it's like you take that leap of faith, the expression comes from, and because people fear, right? That's why we don't
Yeah.
get these things up. We fear the judgment. We fear being in social situations without the lubricants. We fear living without crutches and aids. And so being able to take that leap of faith, to surrender into this, and ultimately to trust that things will be okay, that you'll be guided, you'll have be supported through this process one way or another.
Yeah.
That is what I found was truly the inflection point that allowed me not only then to give up alcohol, but to completely invert my entire life. It flipped on its head. And so I gave up alcohol, I gave up nicotine, I gave up Percocet, I gave up all of these things. I gave up activities that were addictive. It was like a complete life reversal. And that's true change, I see.
Yeah. And it's so empowering when you do go against the mainstream and do things your own way in accordance to your soul, your inner wisdom, and realizing, wow, I'm extra happy now. And actually, much of the things that society has been telling me that I've been abiding by was actually making me miserable and is bullshit. And I can be empowered listening to myself and knowing I know what's best for myself and that, like, it doesn't have to be what everyone else is doing. And it's so reinforcing to realize, like, I can create whatever I want. I don't have to listen to the limitations of society. I don't have to go base my choices off what's standard or normal because I don't believe that's going to work best for myself. And it really allows you to start to trust yourself when you see that going against the mainstream isn't leading you to some destruction. It's actually leading you to your best life. And so it allows you to, I think, really develop a sense of trust in yourself, which is so empowering and just also kind of it's like a little secret you're in on that you kind of get to be like, "Oh, wow. This is pretty awesome that I get to follow my own intuition and inner wisdom and just kind of shine the light." Like, people definitely can tell when you're happier and healthier and you just exude good energy, and it's like, hopefully that empowers other people to be able to follow their own inner voice as well. And
Yep.
so yeah.
Yep.
So I wanted to talk about, I know there's a couple things I have swirling around here. And so I definitely want to dive into how sobriety like catalyzed the creation of Awakenpedia. But first, before we leave behind this like segment of the conversation, I know you said that your family, drinking patterns in your family were very prevalent and it was just everywhere. And so one thing I know a lot of people struggle with is how they will be received with the changes they're making from the people closest to them. And so how was that for you? Did you struggle in terms of any relationships when you made like such a 180?
Yeah, I mean, it affected every relationship, not only with humans, but in a relationship that I carried with everything in life. Ultimately, all for the better. But when you're going through that transition period, it can be a bit tumultuous and
Mm.
unknown, uncertain. And it did create, um, ripples of contention within my network because I had to drop a lot of friendships that weren't, I was on this ascension journey and they weren't ascending with me, energetically speaking, which where I was shedding, these um, entrapments of behavior, and they weren't. So I had to make those tough choices of like, well, uh, is where I'm heading true? And if so, then I have to still have that courage to let people go that aren't compatible with me anymore.
Mm.
Um, and those were tough times in certain ways, and to a large extent, this switch sent me into the unknown. It felt like I was going off into like the woods on my own. And actually, I did do that for quite some time, literally. So uh, I lost a lot of my friends. The whole world seemed to drop away before me for a significant part of this transition. Ultimately, my family, incredibly supportive of the change. They intuitively knew that it was right and healthy for me, so they were very supportive. But um, so many relationships are affected and were affected, and I think that is a large part of why people don't change, don't want to even attempt, or because they're scared. They're scared of how it's going to disrupt the routines of their life and how they're going to operate and continue to get by, and their
Right.
friendships, this and that. So,
Yeah, totally. I think the fear of the unknown is has such a great way of keeping us stuck in comfortable misery or like familiar misery. And it's sad that I let that be me for a very long time where I was unhappy with many aspects of my life. But the thing with sobriety is you don't know like how much of an impact it's going to have until you're doing it. So you have to step out in faith and know I
yeah,
have faith that my life is going to get much better. I don't have evidence of it yet. And I think that the universe really loves when we do that.
right,
And
right.
so
And
it
that's
supports it.
right there. That comment you made is why you have to have that faith, that because you are people prefer known hells than unknown heavens. That's the expression. And it's like,
Mm.
in order to go on this journey, this healing journey, genuinely, it requires faith. It requires a surrender, as I would describe it, into the unknown, trusting that you accepting that which you don't know, and that's what faith is. And um, yeah, and that's what ties in the whole spiritual component to this journey, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like you need where the faith comes in, and how the faith is actually kind of
Like a
providing you with.
propeller.
Yeah, yeah.
It really propels you towards, and it's like providing faith in the universe. It um kind of ropes in the support because until then, if you're just in this mindset, like I'm doing what I'm doing and I'm not changing, you're not even eliciting like the support of the universe because you're providing like there's no energetic exchange when you're just like stuck in your ways and you think you got it all figured out and you're unwilling to change. Like the surrender is what invites the universe to participate in supporting you. And I think
Mhm.
that's like such an important piece that people miss is like it's okay to not know. In fact, it's kind of good because when you don't know, you're surrendering to the potential of possibilities beyond what you know, which what you know when you're in a state of extreme pain and addiction isn't like the end all be all, you know? So, yeah, and I think on the just to one last note on relationships too. I feel like it was also very challenging for me with that, where I was feeling, I think a lot of people can probably relate to this, but I definitely felt like, wow, when I'm trying to make changes for the better, and meanwhile, I was literally blacking out and like getting so drunk I peed my pants, you know? So it's like, I felt like, how can you be not supportive of this or super judgmental of this? But like when you were seeing me doing that, you weren't worried, you didn't care, and so I think that is where I had, like, a light bulb moment with relationships in my life, like, if people were okay watching me self-destruct to that level, A, why would I expect them to be supportive of me being at my best self?
Yeah.
And B, like, a lot of times what I think people don't realize when we're, like, self-destructing is the relationships around us often like, I kind of looking back feel like I just sort of made people feel better about their own drinking, um,
Mhm.
and so when that was removed, it was like, "Oh." Like now I might have to think about my own drinking because I don't have this hot mess that I can
Yeah.
deflect my attention towards. And so just if and I'm just saying like what I've learned for anybody who's listening that feels like triggered by people not feeling supportive or whatnot is our reality is just a reflection of where we're at. And so if we're binge drinking, it's like completely normal that, when you do a 180, those relationships are no longer going to be in alignment. And some of them can realign later or change dynamics, but some of them really do need to be let go of like altogether because they were never in alignment with your highest self.
Right.
And the intentions may not have been as rooted in true like love as we think that they are, when
Mm.
the main source of bonding is substances. And so that's just really important to, I think, to remember for myself and anyone else who's struggling with that. But okay, tell me about how your sobriety and your own kind of healing and transformation evolved into Awakenpedia.
Yeah, sure. So, um, my awakening and healing journey, is the case it seems for most, has been a gradual uh, letting go, right? Gradual shedding of that which is not true, that which has been weighing me down, um, the ego, the subconscious behaviors, all of that stuff. It seemingly has been this tremendous journey. But so I let go of drinking, which came first, and that helped me kind of build what I call sober muscle, which is just the retraining of my mind, to start coming back into true power, gaining more confidence, feeling better about myself, coming into my own skin. Then ended up letting go of nicotine, which is another animal, and just like domino after domino. And the more they fell, the more confident I became. The more I stepped into this fantastic energy of just aliveness and true gratitude for just being, not of being a certain condition, but just being. And so that led that type of confidence ultimately transferred into more areas of my life, including my career. And I was working in private equity at the time,
Mm.
which was providing me with all the money and toys and hedonistic pleasures that you could ask for. But I knew those were shallow, and I had that growing awareness and dissonance within me that
Mm.
knew that there was no deep, genuine commitment or loyalty to this doing. So ultimately, that led to the arising of enough courage to quit my job in finance and to just hop in the Jeep and become a full-time nomad, in search of what I can only describe as truth. Um, and so I did. I just walked in one day and didn't know I would be walking out jobless. So I did. And when I let go of the career of that job, this mountainous golden handcuffs, right? Like that were just enchaining me so tightly. I can't describe the relief I felt, even though I was now without money, right? It was
Yeah.
like,
You're like the
I felt,
irony.
yeah, I was like, okay, that's how I knew. I was like, this was a true decision.
Never felt more freedom or truth here.
Yeah, yeah. But to the mind, it's so counterintuitive and paradoxical because, supposedly
Security.
the job brings you the security, brings the predictability, the certainty of life, all that stuff. But
Hmm.
anyway, I quit and became a nomad. I hopped in the Jeep and I just kind of drove around aimlessly around the country and spent considerable time in various forests and just meditated and journaled and read, and I just let myself calm down. It was really a like self-led nervous system
Yeah.
regulation course, and I gave myself that permission to just breathe and to not have any substances that were keeping me stuck and static. So the longer I spent in that state of purity, the more I calmed down, and the more I calmed down, the more my brainwaves actually got out of that high beta state and started to naturally become more defaulted into the alpha, and could access theta more quickly. And it was through that kind of marination in a more calm, slower brainwave state that I actually ended up being able to start accessing this transcendent divine dimension. And through that is when I actually started to receive what I call downloads um, of insight. That's the only way I can kind of pinpoint it, because uh, that is what I started receiving, and I just started scribing. And I felt like I was like, you know, to the world, I'd look at some crazy person just like in the woods, like scribing these essays. But to me, it just felt, I knew that it was what was necessary. It was what was happening, and I was so surrendered to it. And that's what became the beginnings of Awakenpedia. They were just original channeled essays, micro teachings that I felt were of such clarity, but I knew they weren't mine. I just knew, right? So I don't claim credit over these. It just was like they weren't of me, but they were through me. And I was that vehicle of expression. And I was just letting myself be used in service, divine service. And
Mm.
so I wrote over 150,000 words in a month, and I was just writing all day, every day for now, like it was a month or 2 months of that really intense period. And I just sat with those essays for a couple more months after that, and ultimately felt another calling to have to share these things. So I just started uploading them to the web, started with the Patreon. And from there, that's how it springboarded into what now is a really comprehensive platform with thousands of seekers, hundreds of partners. And it's all evolved so naturally and organically. It's been such a blessing to witness this, because I don't see myself as doing anything outside of just steering the ship and trying to keep it straight and narrow, and to be of genuine service. And so the way Awakenpedia has evolved from that first writing of a scribble has been of genuine just surrender. And I've just kind of let it flourish and flower by its own accord. And yeah, so now it's a teaching, has hundreds of teachings of those micro teachings, audio, written, video. And it has, all the services and retreats and events, and so many incredible partners, including yourself, that are here and aligned with this intention to help heal us at the root level, catalyzing this healing journey, and ultimately transmuting suffering into peace on a sustainable basis. So, yeah, it's just been such a beautiful creation and co-creation, really, where I feel like I'm serving in partnership with the divine. And I know that connection is so real, so true, so strong. Yeah.
Isn't it so ironic that we spend so much time running from ourselves, distracting ourselves from ourselves, when in reality, just leaning in and creating space is like the most direct access to creating exactly what we want in life or what we have the highest potential for. And you just so clearly illustrated how powerful it is to kind of like step away, clear the chatter. And I always say slow down to speed up, but it's like truly, I think a lot of times we operate in a state of resistance because we're constantly trying to go, and we think that we have to create everything through our own blood, sweat, and tears, when in reality, we can kind of just slow down, take time to reflect, meditate. Just taking care of ourselves in mind, body, and spirit allows us to draw in so almost effortlessly, like exactly what we're meant to be doing. And those cliches, like you don't have to see the whole staircase to take the next step. It's so beautiful how when you're in alignment by just caring for your own vessel, taking care of your shit in mind, body, and spirit, doing the inner work, getting yourself into alignment, and then the red carpet rolls out in front of you, as how another podcast guest of mine explained it. And I feel like it's so true. It's like when you're on the right path, it just happens with
Mm.
ease. Not that there's not hard work involved, but it's like even when I'm doing work for my own business, I love what I'm doing. It doesn't feel like work, but it is just interesting to see how opportunities flow to you more naturally. The like next step becomes clear as you just continue to move forward, and it's just so powerful. Like there's really no shortcuts other than just being as clear minded and healthy in mind, body, and spirit as you can. And that makes that co-creation with the universe so much more effortless and direct. And
Mm,
it's just like really getting out of your own way in a lot of ways, which
yeah.
makes it sound really easy, but it's not. But it is at the same time. So
The paradox. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
And it's like how, it's so counterintuitive to the mind to believe or know that rest is productive. To be able to know that, because the mind and the conditioning of our culture and how we're kind of set up, this hardwiring is do, never stop doing. We're defined by our doing.
Yeah.
And when you're in that mode, that conditioning, that mindset, it's a survival mode mindset. It's this
Mhm.
mindset where you're getting chased by the lion as a gazelle
Yeah.
all day, every day. And so um, you never give yourself time to actually slow down to access the juice of who you truly are.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
because creation mode actually only can occur when you are slowed down and you're accessing alpha theta states. That's where the creativity lies. So if you're always in a high beta frequency, that's where you're just the mindless doing, the hamster wheel, and it keeps on going and the music keeps
Yeah.
playing until you slow down.
Yeah.
Right.
And I feel like it can be deceiving too because you can achieve a lot just doing. But it's a lot harder and it's not as aligned as, and usually it's more based on like external validation and what is societally deemed as successful. Going to college, taking out $100,000 in debt for a career that you're not excited about, to get a job to pay it off that you're entrapped in the system by. Which brings me to a question. Do you feel like our culture and many of the things that go directly against us actually being empowered humans is by design to keep us disempowered and disconnected from our highest, most liberated self? Or do you think it's just like kind of an innocent byproduct of some conflicts of interests and corrupt systems that like sort of just evolved into this way? Or do you think it's intentional?
Oh man, that's a tough question. It's almost philosophically inclined, but it kind of brings me into like matrix discussion of like the Agent Smith effect. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's the idea of like, is this by design? Is the matrix that's of imprisonment that we call society, is that intentional?
Accident that they're just
Yeah,
they are capitalizing on, or
yeah.
is it like is it all thought out?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, it's an unanswerable question as far as I'm concerned, and it's all speculation, right? But it is interesting to think about because, I mean, ultimately, to answer that question truly, you'd have to know truly the origin of the universe. You'd have to understand, what is this game that we're playing that we call life?
Mm,
And that's where, we can't know that directly, concretely, conceptually. Like, we can't use words to ever answer that because the truth is beyond words. So we can only surrender to it. The best way to actually get to the answer of that question, Katie, is to let go of trying to answer it so that we can just kind of flow with life. And hopefully the flow of life leads us to
yeah.
answer, because I've thought about that a lot too. And I'm like, what?
This seems
It's
like too disempowering to be accidental.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like what this healing journey, this awakening journey that we're all on is just the game that we're playing. Is this, are we all? Is this a simulation? Are we playing? So
Yeah.
that's kind of what it leads me
Did the
into.
universe create the corrupt systems of the world for us to be oppressed and suffer so that we can overcome something? You never know. Maybe it's
Yeah,
a benefit that so it's just funny to think about because it is oftentimes I know for me too when I started when I decided to stop drinking and really started exploring my programming around alcohol. And wow, like all these stories we tell ourselves around alcohol are so disempowering and they're not even true. And where do they come from? And just that whole process of introspection around my belief systems versus like conditioning around alcohol and versus like what I really wanted with my life, it really led to like a that whole awakening process of exploring, just opening your eyes to so much of our programming around the healthcare system and the food system and everything, just being in health and wellness too. And so it was really sort of disconcerting initially because I'm like, why don't people care that our world operates in this extremely fucked up way? But at the same time, it led me ultimately to being like, well, I can't control other people. I can only control the impact I have and bringing, my most vibrant energy into the world, leading by example, ushering people back to their own inner knowing. Because I did go through a phase where I was kind of like, hello, anybody? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
see this shit over here? What's happening? And then I was like, I don't really feel like forcing people to see information they're not ready to acknowledge or see is helpful, but helping them to become the most awakened version through working with people on alcohol removal, then they can get there in their own way, but you
Yep.
feel
Yep.
compelled sometimes, like when you first make big changes and start seeing big things, you're like wanting to shout it from the rooftops in a way.
Yeah. And I think just the last piggyback comment off that, because I think it's so important in context of drinking and what we're talking about here is just kind of like, the ways society and culture has been developed and how what's embedded now, keeping us stuck in dysfunction, right? And so whether regardless of knowing whether it's intentional or not, we can still at least say with clarity that the way it's designed, the way that it's operating is not serving our best interests, our highest self. It's not actually um, encouraging and ushering us into true health. So, your what the work you do, Katie, is so important. Like what I feel like I'm aiming to do as well. Like we need so much more of this because being able to remove the blocks that prevent us from seeing truly is the first step, as far as I'm concerned, on this journey to ultimately live in better alignment with our
Yeah.
highest self. So, like, alcohol is such a massive block that prevents us from living truly in alignment and ultimately in true health and vibrancy, peace, love, joy. These states that we all want, right? That we feel like alcohol is going to bring us, or maybe it does for 10 minutes,
Yeah.
whatever, that. So we gotta if you're really being called, you're sober curious, like you're being, starting to question the system. Is this actually right? Is it true? Is it healthy? Why am I doing these things? I feel like it's so important to encourage that curiosity and to facilitate that journey, which is why I love what you're doing, because um, for me, I see addiction was my pathway to awakening. And it became the doorway for me to access these higher, transcendent, truthful states.
Yeah.
And so, that catalyzing that systematically around the world for those who are ready. I mean, it's such a divine service. I feel like it's so profound that people don't even know until they go through it.
Yeah. It truly is that. Um, I have another question that is about like tragedy as going through tragedy as a springboard for spiritual growth. And then we can wrap up with, everything that you have on the horizon with Awakenpedia and where people can find you. But I do feel, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this, is that a lot of times, whether, the dark night of the soul is, as something you referred to earlier, is sort of that moment of being in the trenches with yourself, essentially, and kind of reevaluating your belief systems, your programming, and maybe like the world you've created. And it also reminds me of the Tower card in tarot, where it's kind of like this before all transformation, oftentimes there is a lot of great upheaval and questioning and reconstructing. And so, what are your thoughts on how, tragedy, rock bottoms can actually be a catalyst for transformation and awakening?
Yeah. Okay. Big, massive topic, right? Like this to me is in many ways the crux of the work I feel like I'm doing with Awakenpedia, and in some ways all of us are doing as healers, light workers, energy workers, whatever you want to call yourself. Um, but ultimately, I see these hardships, tragedies, rock bottoms. These are the opportunities for us to grow. It's paradoxical, it's counterintuitive, because as you're experiencing it, it feels like hell, right? And the worst situation or time in your life, like the suffering is peaking in intensity. That dark night of the soul is when the suffering is peaking, and it becomes intolerable. At least that's how I'm experiencing. I experienced it, so I'm just speaking on behalf of my experience and using that as in terms of how I see insights here. But what I've found is that, and these are precarious times too, and so it's very fragile, sensitive windows, because so often these rock bottom tragic moments often correlate with suicides, and when we can't take it anymore, like when the suffering is so intense that we don't know what to do. We don't feel like there's any way out other than to end our own life, than to pull the plug, because we see no other way to escape this. So, it's sad to say that, and that's actually what happened with my dad. But if you are ready, if your soul's evolution is ripe enough to the point where this rock bottom tragedy or hardship can catalyze your awakening, peace is right around the corner from that suffering. So if you can just surrender into it, and this is what I did that allowed me, as someone who was, very depressed, existentially, just lost, right? Like I was in that suicidal ideation state. Suffering was so intense. I didn't know how to stop it. Didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to really address it. Everything I thought that I could do to make it better wasn't working. So the point of it was like the rock bottoms and the suffering, the tragedies and the hardships increased my suffering, and the suffering I didn't know how to stop. The suffering was so intense; it was saying the only way to make the stop is to end my own life. But I didn't want to do that because I wanted to live. I just didn't want to be in pain. I didn't want to suffer. So I was in this strange situation where I didn't know what to do, but I didn't want to die. So in spiritual context, I had to die before I died, which in other words is an ego
Ego
death.
death.
Yeah. And so,
Like, okay, nothing I'm doing is working, and so I'm finally willing to maybe try something new.
well, yeah. And that something new was just letting go of me trying in it of itself. So it was a release of my own effort to create my own salvation. It was letting go of my own will so that I could step into God's will, the divine will. I surrendered my willpower and was like, look, show me the way, show me something, show me. I'm here. I don't know what to do. I'm giving up my power, my willpower, trusting that there is another way. I don't want to die, but I don't want to live like this either. So help me, help me. It was an ask for help, right? A true help, ask for help, and that is what allowed me to ultimately access this higher self insight that brought me into the most tremendous state of peace, the peace that's right around the corner from that suffering, from the rock bottom. And that's why I encourage those who are perhaps in similar states as I was to, what do you have to lose? To just let go, to accept where you are, to surrender into this feeling and see what's around the corner. because the alternative for so many people is their own death. But people don't want to die, they just want their suffering to die. And so what I'm trying to advocate here, to encourage and to facilitate, is the catalyzation of ego death, so that people can live from their heart rather than the insanity of their mind. They
Yeah.
can. So that's why, long story short, it's me saying that I think rock bottom, tragedy, hardship, challenge, these are the curveballs life throws at you, that if you're ready, or if you can interpret them in the correct way, you can use them as the catalyzations for your ascension, for your growth, for your healing. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's tricky waters to navigate, you know?
It is. And I think the key that you said is surrender and ego death. I feel like those are such crucial pieces, and why, even with alcoholism, people almost have to get to a rock bottom a lot of times before they are willing to explore their relationship with alcohol, because it has to get to a point where your ego is not telling you, I got this, I'll figure it out, like I can do it on my own. It gets to a point where you have to relinquish control, surrender, and realize like you don't all have it figured out. And that is when you get the opportunity to invite the universe and to support you just through the simple energetics of surrendering.
Yeah, yeah. It's,
So good.
yep, faith.
Amazing. Okay, so before we do the where to find you and your aspirations for Awakenpedia, if anything's on the horizon, um, is if you could just tell old drinking Cam like one thing from your perspective now, what would it be?
Honestly, it's in context of exactly what we were just talking about, which is that uh, my old drinking, you know, substance filled self, escapism self, um, so much of those times were so torturous, right? Like the intensity of suffering was so high that like I just, life was miserable, and I didn't know what to do. But uh, all those times I thought that I was being buried, I was actually being planted. And
Mm.
so the idea is like, if I could tell myself something, or those who are perhaps in the thickness of their suffering now, is that this is part of your journey, and see if you can just trust it, knowing that sometimes, and actually most often in life, the things that are most hard to deal with, the adversities, the tragedies, the they're growing pains, and you're not being buried. Usually you're actually just being planted. So trusting that is the best advice I could give for myself now and back then, which is
Yeah.
like, continue to know that this is an unfolding, right? This life is a journey, it twists and turns, and see if you can exist and operate from beyond the polarity of trying to judge it as good or bad. It is what it is, and ultimately we're all awakening and destined to actually come back and back home, to return to oneness in that sense, returning back home. And so oftentimes when you think that, what's happening is the worst thing in the world, actually is the best thing for you. It's just the blessing in disguise. And so you could save yourself so much torture, pain, suffering, perhaps even save your life, if you can recognize that what you're going through right now is actually serving you, and just to trust it, and to be able to stay in that state of receptivity, so that when the opportunity comes, you can then be like, that's why this happened.
Yeah.
That's why I went through this.
Yeah.
So
I love that.
yeah,
The seed and plant, the buried planted seed analogy. I'm a big fan of that one.
yeah, yeah.
So good. So, okay, tell us where people can find Awakenpedia and you on social media, and yeah, anything else you want to share about anything you have coming up. This episode probably will be like a month out, so anything beyond that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, Instagram is perhaps our most active social media channel, which I encourage people to check out. We have a lot on there in terms of people being able to discover our services, our partners, just all the offerings, to get a taste and a flavor of the Awakenpedia vibration, to see if it aligns with you, right? If you kind of resonate with the things we're putting out there. So Instagram is a great channel. Of course, our website as well, awakenpedia.com. That kind of is a great hub for those to kind of just learn more in detail about everything and to sign up as a member, which is free. We're in
Yeah.
process.
Keyword, membership is free, people.
Yeah.
That's really exciting. It's such an amazing resource, seriously.
Yeah, and it's just continuing to grow. Our aspirations are not materially derived. I run this as a nonprofit, but I do have intentions to spread this as far and wide as possible so that it can help as many people. It's a humanitarian effort, and so our intentions are to grow this to tens of thousands of members, thousands of partners. It's a congregation of the world's light workers, healers, and seekers, and bringing it all together under one roof to combine these independent pockets of light so that we can shine brighter and our message can extend further. So yeah, awakenpedia.com, that's where people can learn about everything, sign up as a member. And we're currently in process of creating the member portal, which when this episode airs, it will be live. So people can sign up for free there. And if you're a healer or a facilitator, like yourself, Katie, people can explore partnership with us and apply, because it is an invite only program in that sense. So people can check out partnership and learn more there too.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being on. This conversation was awesome.
Mhm.
I loved it. I think there was so many good takeaways, and you just have a really great way of articulating yourself and getting your message across in a way that's so poignant. And I think a lot of people can resonate to the suffering you describe. I know I definitely can. And so just excited to see how Wikipedia continues to unfold, and I'm grateful to be in partnership with you all.
Yeah, thank you so much, Katie. And I echo back that sentiment to you too. I speak with lots of people, right, every day, and lots of potential partners. And the work that you do, the vibration that you emanate, is one of the most real of any. So I want to just, commend you for the work you're doing, for your own journey, your own courage, and for stepping into leadership as someone who's helping to guide others along this path in the way that you do, this holistic sobriety, this approach of total, multidimensional mind, body, spirit wellness. It's so important, and we need more people like you. And I just want to, support you in everything that you do in any ways that I can. So please always, let me know. But I know that we'll be working a lot together in time to come,
Yeah,
with all this stuff we got coming up. And
I know.
so, yeah.
Excited. Yeah, stay tuned for virtual retreats, all kinds of fun stuff. Like he
Yeah.
said, Awakenpedia.com. And now I'll let you and your kitty go. You saw the cat jumping around back there.
Yeah.
Like, Dad.
That's Elle. She's the spirit kitty. She's the mascot of Wikipedia.
Awesome. Love her. What's her name? Scout?
Elle. Elle.
Elle.
Yeah.
Oh, like the Elle from Stranger Things?
Yeah.
Oh, well, thanks again for coming on, and we'll chat soon. I hope everyone enjoys this episode. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if it resonated. Bye, y'all.